Hello, thank you for joining in tonight with the Lessons of Vietnam show. We're going to continue on with our show from last week. Let's talk about how you can get in touch with us and take part of the show. Um, Alan, can you go to that? There you go. My name is Bill Dixon. I'm your host. I was Vietnam 67, 68, little thing called TET going on. We are being broadcast courtesy of Nissan Communications World Headquarters in Raleigh, North Carolina. If you want to send me some information about something you see on the show and so forth, and you can't get in during the show, send me an email at dixonbill80@yahoo.com. But even better, during the show tonight, give me a call at 919-518-9773 and put your comment over the air. It's okay. We'll be nice. Or even better, come on to Computers 2K Voice. And you can see, you can get your questions answered and so forth, or your comments. Let's see, we're trying to tell the true story of the Vietnam War and get rid of some of the myths and lies and half-truths and so forth out there. There's so many of them. If you know, September is National Suicide Month. They're doing out of the, everything they can to stop the 22 a day. If you are a veteran or you're a family member of a veteran who is in crisis right now with the COVID, everybody's locked up, quarantined and so forth. Recently talked to two veterans who were in need myself. I'm involved with Vets to Vets United, which does service dogs, and both of them put in applications for dogs, but they sounded really desperate on the air or in the email, so that I call them, just check, make sure. We've had several phone calls since then. So if you know someone out there, give them this number, 1-800-273-8255, and be sure that you have them press 1. So let's reach out, and you reach out, either one, and let's see if we can't get these veterans some help. Okay, tonight's show is going to be a continuation. What, if anything, did we learn from the Vietnam War, Part 2? Now, if you watched the show last time, you know that some people didn't think we learned anything. Some people thought we learned a great deal. We just hadn't used it. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to continue that exploration of what veterans had to say. I've got a few civilians I have put there, 2% worth in, but it's been mostly veterans who are making what they felt like, if any, we learned from it. And here's the first one. Some people will kill you for money. I think that's got to do with a lot of the corruption that was supposed to be going on. Never let the government run the military. Let the military handle it. That has been one of the strong responses we've had. In other words, President Johnson said that we couldn't bomb a outhouse without his approval. Kind of gives you an idea how the government ran the war. If we not let the government control the military, we'll be just another country taken over by a military coup. Not far from that now. I guess there's some truth to that, but it's still, the government has no business. They start the wars, they can end the wars, but the wars need to be fought by the people on the ground and so forth, the information. Someone says do what General Shawcroft did in Desert Storm and keep the damn media and photographers out of the war. Pass on only what you want them to know. Don't let politicians run the war from their polished seats. Let the military do the jobs without government. Okay. Going on to that, Schwarzkopf did kind of give some wrong information so they could get the war started without everybody in the world knowing about it. This everybody deserves to know. I'm not quite certain about that. There's some things you don't want to know, or especially if you might get some people killed. Don't go to war unless it has been declared. As you remember, the Vietnam War was not a war. It was a conflict, because Johnson never declared war. He declared it a conflict. He did declare the war on poverty was a war, but the Vietnam War was never declared a war because he couldn't get both of them cleared as a war. Be careful fighting anyone who has nothing to lose. Going back to talking about the communists in North Vietnam, I'm not certain that they didn't have anything to lose, but they obviously had more patience than the United States and its people. Don't let politicians run the war. We keep going back to that one quite a bit. Don't support corrupt governments. They can't win the support of the populace plus all the above. Oh, and get home for Woodstock and some of that free love. Okay. You know, I can understand why some of the protesters were out there protesting, because they were having, they were talking about free love and having a little bit of doobie to work on, and the music and so forth. I would get most young guys to join up with them. I have a friend of mine that was at Woodstock. He was also did 2 tours in Vietnam. Let the NCOs run the unit. Most were involved and knew what the hell was going on. Not the LTs or lieutenants or even the generals had a clue under the thumbs of Washington. They were there. Most of the generals were there to get that extra star, according to whoever sent this one in. If you are rich, you can fake bone spurs. I think that covers a couple of presidents. Don't inhale along the way. Just use cigars as pointers. No comment on that one. But somebody did. I get it. 2 wrongs make it right. Brilliant logic. He didn't say they made it right. They just made his comment. Yes, we always get involved, even today. When will this all end? Lord only knows about that one. I guess it will never end, because we've been in war for our since we started in this country. And anyway, I agree that politicians should learn the lessons of the past. The military structure, chain of command, and discipline is far supported and more knowledgeable than any politician without military experience. I think when they become politicians, sometimes somebody goes up there and puts a plug in their ear and drains out all the military experience and so forth. So keep the politicians out. So keeps right on seeming to be a strong motivation in what we've learned. Nothing. That's why they say history repeats itself. We'll repeat this in another 50 years or so. We didn't wait 50 years, did we? That's why I say love, laugh, love, play, party, drink alcoholic beverages in moderation, and play bingo. Happy days. Okay? Johnson and Nixon were both assholes. This is just what it was given, and a special kind of stupid. No one has ever conquered Vietnam. Even Genghis Khan got his ass whipped there. Okay, that's true to a certain extent. Don't sell hardware to the communists that will eventually kill Americans. Our trade association was selling all kinds of hardware, and quite often when you captured not quite often, but often when you captured the Viet Cong supplies and so forth, you see made in the USA or donated by the USA with the communists. It all started with JFK, according to this guy's response. Yeah, he sent in the advisors to start with. And here's a response from that. I know, but he was killed years before things got really rolling. The only good comment is a dead one thing. Now they are here openly rebelling against our system and way of life. Sad but maddening. Okay, that kind of reflects about what's going on in our country today and the socialist movement that's coming on so strong. Not to let the politicians run a war, turn it over to the military and get out of the way. There were tons of lessons we should have learned while still engaged there. Why we didn't bother is beyond belief. Now, I'm going to say amen to that one. I think the part of the problem, we learned them, but nobody who's in power now was involved then or just forgot about it and so forth, because they sure hadn't used it. Don't fight a war that you don't intend to win, and don't let politicians try to manage the battlefield. Some of that we got going on right now. I'm not certain there's a I know during Vietnam there was no, well, this is what we got to do to win. You can never do that when you just count body count. If you don't take property and hold it, you're going to never get it anywhere. I like this comment. Absolutely nothing learned, in all caps, exclamation points. He had a good, strong opinion there. Not a damn thing. The politicians are still running the wars and expecting our warriors to fight fair while the enemy fights dirty. That goes back to a little thing called the rules of engagement, where we had our hands tied behind our back and they shoot at us and can run off and we couldn't do nothing about it. And then somebody says, don't go there, it's dangerous. And I'm gonna think here that he was talking about asking the question, did we learn anything as being dangerous? Somebody says, it don't mean nothing. What you gonna do, take away my birthday? Well, we used to say, what are they gonna do, send me to Vietnam when we were there? It doesn't mean anything. Well, that's kind of the more English-wise better, but I like to, it don't mean nothing better myself. 58,405 reasons we should have not been involved in other people's battles. War, sadly, is always going to be around somewhere. It's an ugly thing, man's inhumanity to man. Each power thinking they are in the right. It won't end until that which is perfect comes. And I think what they're talking about there is Jesus Christ coming back or God coming back. Okay. My thought, maybe our original concern was late 1950s, legitimate. Fear of spreading communism, similar to today's fear of China buying, spreading in the various relationships around the globe, and then weaponizing it to force their community centralized government. I guess they kind of weaponized that virus, because it sure has put the United States back. So it goes back to the domino, I think this gentleman is trying to say, or lady, depending on who posted this. Politics and military action and leadership do not mix. Politics and military action and leadership do not mix. As I stated before, base commander and our unit commanders from the 7th Air Force told Billy Graham, we're not here to win the war. Take it or leave it. It wasn't good, but it's the only war we had. I don't know, because we used to have a couple more going on. We had a war going on in Laos, we had a war going on in Cambodia, and we had the war going on in Vietnam. So I guess you kind of put them all into one. So I guess clump them all together, consolidate them. Vet a weapon and follow the specifications before giving it to the troops to use, such as M16. With powder residue and cleaning oil. When the M16 first came out, being it was bought by the lowest, being the lowest bidder. They came out, was decided to buy the rifle, but did not read the instructions for the rifle, that the bullets were supposed to be low powder residue with a special cleaning oil. So the government, its infinite wisdom, sent them right on off to their troops in Vietnam, and they jammed up to the point you needed them like a muzzle loader, a rod to stab in there and beat it until you got it unstuck. So Congress got involved and realized that, hey, we need to come up with a powder with less residue. They did, and M16 did much better, especially when they had the correct cleaning oil. So war creates jobs and make the rich richer. Amen to that one. Generals should run wars, not positions in Washington. That was another way of saying what some of the other guys have been saying. I believe we get into these wars to let someone else test our new weapons. You know, I kind of go along with that to a certain extent. Vietnam was kind of a proxy war in the Cold War, where we were fighting China and Russia, and everybody come up with the new weapons and tried them out in Vietnam. Let's just try how this works today, and let's try how this works today. And oh yeah, we might lose a couple of soldiers, but that's a part of the testing the weapons and so forth. So that's a I think that's a valid thought if you want to think about it. Maybe not everything, but it's something we learn, I believe. I learned guys I never would have met risked their lives for me and I for them, the brotherhood. In other words, if you were out in the boonies, you were not fighting for mom and apple pie. You were not fighting for the domino theory to stop communism. You were fighting for the guy in the foxhole who's eating cold sea rations right beside you. And that's brought together as quite a strong brotherhood. War is an ugly, vile thing, not to be entered into lightly. But once committed, one goes all out to win. No half measures, no stalemate, total victory. Once the other quits, then the suits can go back to leading. In other words, once it's all over with, the politicians can go back to leading. Half measures. When you go in and you take a hill and you lose 4 or 5 American troops, and then when you won the hill, go, okay, we won, and leave, and then 2 days later, you got to come back and do it all over again. To me, that's a half measure. And then someone says amen to the one above. Then we got, don't allow candidates to interfere with peace talks before they are elected. If not elected, not at all. See, it's now a part of history that during the peace talks when Nixon was running for presidency, he went to the communists and told them do not make any, actually he went to the communists and to South Vietnam and told them not to make any agreements until he was president because they'd get a better deal. Now, that was 4 or 5 years later before the election. I wonder how many American soldiers died because Nixon told them to don't make a peace pact until I get in there. Keep the politicians and public out and let the military do their job. But the biggest thing is keep the media out and do not let them report from the front lines. They will slant it to suit their narrative and get more soldiers injured or hurt. Going back to the 2 famous pictures that I always go back to, the little girl running down the street burned. The media gave you the idea that Americans were the mean guys that dropped those napalm bombs on those poor innocent children. It was not American soldiers. During the Tet offensive, taking back over of Saigon, when the South Vietnamese general shot the prisoner who should have been tortured and then shot, as far as I'm concerned, for what he was doing, that we were all responsible for what that general did. They slanted the narrative to fit more. The narrative came back was they had taken over the American embassy during the Tet Offensive in Saigon, which did not happen. So the media did have its own slant to a certain state there, and I've had several conversations with some of the reporters from there who swear up and down that they reported it just like it was. I vowed never to let myself be bored, and I stuck to it. As they say, war is a mixture of boredom and pure panic. Maybe 2 hours of boredom and 15 minutes of pure panic. Well said, and I bet the Brotherhood of Vets feel the same way. That's what the person's response was to the other. We won the battles. The politicians screwed us and still do over Agent Orange and blue and white and black, pink. Allow the warriors to hold the government liable for their tests that killed or maimed them without their permission or knowledge, such as Agent Orange, when they tested the soldiers in World War II during the nuclear test. They took a bunch of sailors and other military members out on a ship, and when they exploded the bomb, all they told them was don't look at the bomb to see just how the nuclear reacted with their bodies and so forth. They sprayed different chemicals on the ships during our time to see how those chemicals affected the soldiers, but they never were told that. They would have been guinea pigs. Korea and Vietnam are wars America wants to forget. I believe partially because we regret allowing the politicians to manage at levels they should not have even been involved with, partially because money was the most powerful dictator. Now, Korea has been pretty much forgotten, but uh, the Vietnam War, you can almost compare with our Civil War. It probably created more unrest and anything since the Civil War. It probably divided the country up more than anything since the Civil War, and maybe considering the Civil War and Vietnam War, I think it probably divided it up more. So it's hard to forget the Vietnam War because what it did to our country by putting it in two different categories, you know, those for the war, those for against the war, and so forth. And partially because money is always a powerful dictator. It's like the old saying is, follow the money. And this gentleman here, old lady, you never really leave. Amen to that one. It's like the saying, when were you in Vietnam? I was there last night. Lesson. Do not fear countries that have little or no capitalism. They cannot produce the wealth to conduct war on you. Russia is a good case in point right now. We have no fear of them making war on us. They can't afford it. Reagan was given the honor of being the one supposedly who crushed the communist government in Russia. We outspent them on nuclear weapons and space race and so forth. China did a lot of money, about 80% of all the money that went into North Vietnam came out of China. Of course, they were getting the money, a lot of the money from us. It's not each man for himself. It's a team effort. Individual courage is rare. I fought not to disappoint the guys beside me. There were times I wanted to run, but I didn't because that would leave my buddy alone on his own. I couldn't do that. That goes back to the brotherhood we were talking about earlier. When you know what hits the fan, boy, it would be nice to get up and run and get out of the way, but you can't because your buddy's beside you. What's going to happen to him? We fought bravely and won the battles, but the greedy politicians will not let our generals call the shots. The US didn't learn shit. Well, I think I'm going to change that. The US learned a lot. It just didn't use it worth a shit. Actually, the Korean War and the Vietnam War drained the resources of the USSR. World communism died because of those two wars. We changed the course of history. Communism has changed a great deal since that time. I hadn't thought of it that way. That was a response for the question, the statement above. Most historians believe it now. Peter Zaham and George Friedman support this view of history. And I like this one. Next time, claim bone spurs and be Jody. Now, if you're out there and you don't know who Jody is, let me see if I can explain Jody to you. When we were going through basic training and so forth, the drill sergeants were always talking about Jody. Jody was the guy who didn't come into the military. He was the guy staying home that was out seeing our girlfriends or our wives and having an affair with our wives and seeing our girlfriends. So that's who Jody was. That was who that person was referring to as Jody. Some Jodies skipped out and stayed out of the war whatever way they could, but they had no problems going out with our girls and teaching them to hate us and so forth. So that's how to explain to you who Jody was. So it comes up again. All right, let's get right on. Another one decided, a lot of people found this out. I am not a coward. They served their time, did the best job they could do, and came home under adverse conditions. I think many of us agree that dirty politics must not interfere in our wars, and what happened in Vietnam is a good example of why we lost Vietnam. Okay, it goes back to the politics and rules of engagement and so forth. You can't bomb this unless I gave you permission, and you can't bomb that because we might hurt a Russian or a Chinese person. Did we really lose or we just quit? That's a good question. I've heard that one over and over again. Did we lose the war? We weren't there when the war ended. How did we lose the war? We just quit and came home. It's like the little rich kid that comes in and plays ball with you. Back when I used to be playing with ball, come in with a dodgeball or a kickball or his baseball or whatever, and he'd get tired and go home. So the game was kind of over because we went home. We lost because we're made to quit. Okay, Nixon pulled us out. Congress cut off all the money. So that's the reason the war ended the way it did. Again, did we lose the war if we weren't there, or did we lose the war because we were involved and just walked home and quit and and lost it because we were not there? So, kind of figure either way. Political cause is not always on our side. Neither is God. Definitely the political causes. And then someone has questions. Did we learn anything? Was there anything to be learned? And if so, did we learn it? And I like this one. Protest the war, not the warrior. You know, when we came home, for the people who were back here protesting, the soldier coming home from Vietnam, we represented the war. So they took the war out on us. They were able to stay home for whatever way they did, burning their draft cards, getting a low lottery number or whatever, basically, or keeping themselves in college so they could not have to be served. So they protested us, not the war. If you don't like what's going on, don't get mad with the soldier, the warrior. Protest the war. I don't know how you can really do that because the soldiers in the war, but you know, when we came home, the VFWs and American Legions didn't want us because we were the first ones that lost the war. So they protested the war. They protested against us, just like the civilians were doing. So it wasn't just the civilians. I learned that some who carry your sons into war seldom have the courage to enlist and take point on patrol. There were a lot of politicians who had bone spurs or whatever to keep from going in. There was a lot of wealthy people and politicians and so forth who affected their draft board before the lottery came in and could buy your son's way out of being drafted. And then someone says, sadly true, and I'm not certain, I guess they're covering all those above. If they would have kept politics out of the war and turned us loose, maybe we could have changed the name of Hanoi to Billy Bob City and give China a reason to call their troops out of the war. Kind of like that. Instead of change the name of Hanoi to Billy Bob City. All right, let's see. Next one we got here. Let's see what's we got here. Mind your own business. I'm not certain that this person was telling me to mind my own business or we as a country should mind our own business, but I'm going to assume, which is a dangerous thing to do, is he was talking about the country to mind our own business and stay out of the Vietnamese War. And then someone else will come up here and answered that question individually or as a society. Okay, I think it somewhat fits either way. Only put 19 rounds in the M16 clip. It held 20, but you didn't want to put the last one in there because it kind of messed up the spring and it would help it jam. Then it says, if you notice, only put 19 rounds in M16 clips. Yeah, I only put 18 months in, won't take no chances. Guess I should have read that 18 rounds. In other words, this person only put 18 rounds in his clip for his M16 as opposed to the 19. Next person says governments lie. I think most everybody can agree to that one to a certain extent. Leave bases from which to punish bad enemy behavior. Leave bases from which to punish bad enemy behavior. That one, guys, I'm not quite certain what that one is. If you can come up with the idea of what that one is, I wish you'd let me know. Quit wasting good young men's lives for something you have no intention of finishing. That's a good one. That wall is not just a wall. It's not just a statue of what happened. That wall in Washington, D.C. has it inscribed on it. The young men and women's lives that were lost, and we had no intention of finishing. When a country is fighting for their own independence, then don't screw with them. Didn't we learn anything from our own American Revolution? And of course, shoot first and ask questions later. No politicians allowed. Keep going back to that one. Never trust a politician or religious leader. None. I still made mistakes post-war. That is a none. We didn't learn anything, and this person still made mistakes after the war. I think our government still made a lot of mistakes post-war. Political leaders have no business running a war. It's like letting an idiot teach your children about life. College professor, same, Shazam. Never let politicians run wars and never trust them. Never trust the media. Duck. And that's not the quack quack kind. That's you better duck your head. Do not move towards the sound of gunfire. Only soldiers move towards the sound of gunfire. This shit sucks. Do not repeat. Now, I'm not certain if he was talking about not repeating what he said there or just don't repeat what we did in Vietnam. Almost say he said that not to repeat what we did in Vietnam. Billionaire pigs like to murder working people. Okay, I guess we're talking about Monsanto with Agent Orange and some of the other groups, and Colt and some of the other groups who made a lot of money, some of the engineering groups. Guys, you wouldn't believe the engineering groups over there. Did we not learn anything from our own Civil War? Was it worth the cost of blood and treasure? No. Too many died for nothing. We, the young men of America, were willing to lay down our lives for the freedom we think exists. We found out the wars was being manipulated by the Democrats who would not extend the budget. Goes back to the who was in charge of Congress when they refused to give money to help South Vietnam. When President Gerald Ford gave his speech asking for the money that was promised, that the Congress got up and walked out. I'm not getting into one party or whatever. I should have left that out, but I didn't even notice it at the time. Why are you asking? Be proud. Well, I'm asking because I think it's something we've all been asking since we left Vietnam. I think it's something we need to know for future generations. And I am proud of what I did in Vietnam, the efforts I put in. I did the best I could do for what my country told me I was there for, and I came home. And today I'm doing Lessons of Vietnam online shows so that we can get the true story out of the Vietnam War and those of us who were involved. So I am proud. Love and respect for God and country, and a reality check on what America is all about compared to the rest of the world. I think that's something we need to do now. I'm not certain that we learned that from the Vietnam War, but I think that's something we need to do now. If the House and Senate of the United States ever stabilize from the last 4 years of constant manipulation, I think we as citizens will continue to see the erosion of the Constitution and the freedoms we have not. We'll leave that one alone and let you read that one again on your own and come up with your own conclusions. Brave soldier, gutless politicians, enough said. Enough said. As a 19-year-old, like a lot of us who volunteered, I eventually learned to take responsibility for my actions while over there and beyond. I've heard a lot of politicians today say that 18, 19-year-olds have no business with guns. 18, 19-year-old men not only had guns in Vietnam, they led other men with guns into war. No exemptions for anyone. Everyone serves. Good luck on that one. No exemptions. Everybody got to serve. If you were between the age of 18 and 35 or whatever it was, you automatically went into the service. Somewhat like Israel is doing or has done. Amen. And then one says, agree. Different groups learn different lessons. I'll go along with that one. I learned not to trust anyone who would say, I'm from the government, want some help? Well, that covers a lot of old jokes. Politicians learn nothing. The rest of us, including the military, don't start the damn thing if you don't plan on winning. Give an objective and let the military do it. In other words, tell us what you want and give us what we need and get the hell out of the way so we can get it done. Never again will one generation of veterans abandon another. That is the motto of Vietnam Veterans of America. This person is an active life member since 1984. I am a life member of Vietnam Veterans of America. I'm on the North Carolina State Council as a board of directors. I fought the good life members since 1984. We fought the good fight to make our country do right by us. And we're still fighting the good fight to have our country do right by us. Talk to Vietnam vets whose children and grandchildren are having the same diseases from Agent Orange. But never let one generation of veterans abandon the other. That's when we came home and the Veterans Organization didn't want us because we were the first group that lost the war. They kind of abandoned us. Now they're begging for our membership. That every member of Congress and the Senate should serve in the military. Had they done so, we would have never walked away without a victory. That's an interesting concept. Communism was evil then and it is evil now. We tried to stop it there and now it's here. Politicians start wars, they don't win them. Media is unreliable. Amen. I learned to never trust my government, no matter which side was in control. They are all selfish bastards. A lot of information about the governments and how veterans think about their government today. Rotate, and this is a big one. Rotate units rather than individuals. The men you are training with, all go home together. Unit cohesion and training far in excess of the other systems. In other words, unit cohesion and training to gives you more cohesion in a unit. If you're going to participate in a war, don't screw around and get in there and do what you need to win. The North Koreans sent units over. In other words, those groups trained together, fought together, and then they came back home together and another group went over. When that group was ready to come home, the other group came back. So they fought together, they had unit cohesion. When you got people coming in who have no experience at all, there's a learning curve as in anything else, and you try to keep them alive. So rotate units rather than individuals. As we fought the war, they fight the debate today. They learned that. That's one of the few things they actually seem to have learned. They still send units over today as units more than individuals. One lesson that should have been learned is don't commit our soldiers to fight with one hand tied behind their backs. Another lesson is that news media is out to sell newspapers and television time. They are not actually interested in what is best. If you remember during the Vietnam War, news became a business. They started hiring these talking heads and paying them a whole lot of money. So then it became back to ratings, because the more ratings you got, the higher you could charge for your commercials. Have a plan and follow through until the objective is reached. Leaving is not winning. Leaving is not winning. My family was the only ones that didn't disown me when I came home. A lot of veterans out there who came home and their former friends didn't want anything to do with them. Their former girlfriends didn't want to have anything to do with them because of the war protesters turned them against. The media was way too much, has way too much influence. It can cost a lot of lives. There needs to be at least a little censorship similar to the level of World War II. I was kind of young then, so I'm going to take your word for it. But I know there was you didn't send the information back of what unit was going where and so forth because somebody checked all your messages before you sent them back. Thank you. I believe there should be an NCO as a censor for the civilian press, no exceptions. There was in World War II. When FDR saw the newsreel from Tarawa, he forbade the news from every shore and U.S. bodies floating like that as well as strewn about. Today's news people would stage the bodies for the worst possible view. Okay, doesn't speak well for today's news media. That politicians don't learn from their mistakes, and the hits just keep on coming. I feel that the guys that start the next war are the rear echelon guys of this war. In other words, the guys who stayed at home, a lot of them are politicians today who are starting more wars. We can't fight wars all over the world and expect to control all that goes on in those nations. We have no real business in a war except to protect our borders and possessions. We're not even doing that today. Of course, there are reasons for us to be in combat for limited periods. Deploy, fight, and go home as a cohesive unit, not constantly changing personnel. Enlistees are more solid than draftees. If possible, fight, win, or don't fight. When you give blood to take territory, don't give it back so you can do it over again next week. Politicians are all assholes, and none can be trusted. Support our troops from the home front. Do the job and leave. As you can see, there's a lot of strong emotion out there with the Vietnam vets as to the question. Watch your ass. Keep the politicians out of it. And any American who gives aid and comfort to the enemy automatically loses their right to citizenship. If they enter the United States, they will be arrested and tried for treason. Are you listening, Jane Fonda? Jane Fonda was not the only one. Some of our politicians today also went over there and confided with the North. But that is a good one. Wars are for political purposes, in many cases, as well as was Vietnam. We cannot back our enemies, ever. I did my service and never saw Vietnam. I must be from someone in the Navy or someone who served in Thailand with the Air Force. Wars happen when politics fail. Soldiers learn to fight and die, not for politics, nor even for their country, but for their comrades in arms. War is as close to hell as one can experience on earth. Again, we go back to politics and the soldiers fighting for his buddy. Survival. This person learned survival. My husband said that all the young people who went there did the best they could without the help of the government. And he was right. I have learned a big one. I always believed that whatever our country did was the correct thing to do. My dad served in World War II, and if no one else, if nothing else, he taught me to love and respect my country. Right or wrong, my country. Then when Vietnam started to get really bad, I felt the country knew what it was doing. That was so wrong. I'm still proud of all the men who served. I'm proud of Lane and Joseph. Now, Lane and Joseph was two of the Marines that were left on the island of Koh Tang in Cambodia, deserted and left on the island. That was after Saigon fell and the communists captured an American merchant marine ship. I think they were robbed, and I still don't know why. Vietnam was about what? My husband wanted to protest from the very beginning, and to realize about 40 years later that he was right makes me feel stupid. Ma'am, I'm not certain I know who this is now. I hate to tell you this, but I don't think he was right protesting. Okay, Lane was a soldier that was killed in doing Tet in 1968 from Mount Olive, North Carolina, and Joseph was his brother, who was one of the three Marines who were left deserted on the island by the Marines under orders. Don't be last in the chow line. That's a good one if you got a chow line. Don't be last in picking out what sea rations you want either, because you'll end up with ham and llamas. Should have never happened. Welcome home. Okay. It's impossible to look at the Vietnam War through the eyes of 2020. In the 1960s, Russia and communism were trying to control many parts of the world, not just Vietnam. Vietnam was a battle in the Cold War, just like Gettysburg was a battle during the Civil War. The men and women who fought in Vietnam are heroes, and we're on the front lines during the Cold War. At the time, it was necessary, and yes, it made a difference. Again, it goes back to being I lost the word there. A war we're fighting, but in someone else's war. I'm curious too. The book, The War, I just published covers a wide angle but detailed cross-cultural psychological analysis of the Vietnam War, and I'm wondering if I have missed anything. Well, I hope you're watching this and watch the other show, because I think you get a pretty good education on what the Vietnam vets have had to say. I'm a twice wounded and malaria victim of the Vietnam War. We lost 58,200 young men for nothing. Now, the reason that keeps changing, the 58,000, is they've added some almost every year since the wall was put up. We accomplished nothing, and our vets are still dying from Agent Orange-related illnesses, 65 and 67. We were not in it to win. We definitely learned that one. We learned there is news reporting, and then there's propaganda. The communists were really good on propaganda. Dry socks. Oh boy, that's a necessity. You would not, unless you were there and your feet were wet all the time and saw how the skin rotted off, you just don't believe how important dry socks were. Y'all should have learned to hate war, but not the warriors. I hate all who didn't serve in the NAM and all the protesters for the rest of my days. This is a quote from another Vietnam veteran. This is not my quote. But I think everybody who fights war hates it. Those that served and went to Vietnam have become a unique band of brothers and sisters. It's like the World War II, the band of brothers. We have became a band of brothers. We may not have fought together, but everybody that went to Vietnam is considered a brother or sister. We are a band in that way. Release a general to do their thing. Reach a soldier's report by William Westmoreland. Homework for you. The war was defunded by Congress, which at the time, a party had the majority in both the House and Senate. That was what was called the end of the Vietnam War. All of our men and women who died there died for no reason. Okay, I'm gonna disagree with that. I just, the families don't need that kind of. They talk to the Vietnamese Americans here today and see if they think that we died for no reason. That is why you do not allow politicians the ability to run a war. When we pulled out, millions of Vietnamese were killed by the communists. It's no longer taught in our schools as to what socialism and communism do to a country. Don't trust politicians. Kind of recurring theme here. Always watch out for yourself and the people you love. Carry a weapon and be prepared to use it. Sleep with one eye open. Says it all. Never, ever underestimate your enemy. Take care of your feet in case you have to run, Forrest, run. Okay, it goes back to dry socks. War is hell, then you die. Another old cliche. In spite of what a lot of folks say, our participation in the Vietnam War was honorable. We were signatories to SEATO, South Asian Treaty Organization, and such were fulfilling our commitment on the provisions of that treaty. The rolling thunder carpet bombing of North Vietnam should have continued, Chinese troops casualties or not. The world would be a much different place today had the politicians not been so cowardly, and if Walter Cronkite had the MSN of the time could have been truthful as opposed to their continual stream of lies. We all bleed red. We all die not wanting to. Color doesn't matter. And this person says, I ain't got enough room here to say it all. Well, that's why it's taken 2 shows to say it all. I was a grunt in the bush. The first time I got back to the hill, I got shit burning duty. Been there, done that. I quickly learned not to ride the back of the mule when collecting cans of shit. Now that had to be a Marine because they used a cart. It was called a mule. They load them up on a cart. But let's see now, when you were burning it, nobody gave you any shit. Not many people shot at you when you're burning shit. The mosquitoes left you alone. You never stepped on a landmine. The leeches usually left you alone. So it ain't all that bad that way. But just don't ride on the mule. The mule is not a four-legged animal. It's a cart. This is from a civilian who never served. I learned war was the worst thing mankind participates in. I learned to respect all who have to bear the weight of war. I learned that we as a nation have always been there for foreign people that we know nothing about. I learned our nation is the most humanitarian country because of the young boys and young girls who have given them ultimate sacrifice for me to be here now. Thank you to all Vietnam veterans and active military. Whomever you are, we appreciate it. If you're going to fight a war, fight to win. This is a lesson that has apparently been lost to this generation of leaders. Amen to that one. Okay. Much of what I wanted to say has been eloquently said. Let the warfighters run the war. Too many politicians were worried about their seats and listened to the protest. In other words, they get elected and all they do for their time in office is run for new election. We have always been a warring country, and I believe those with experience should be the ones in charge of our security and safety. A veteran with appropriate knowledge, integrity, and intelligence should run the country. War is good for big businesses. Desert Storm victory lessons learned from Vietnam, which is still nuke Hanoi. Good mates last a lifetime. Kissinger sold us all out, the bastard. He sold South Vietnam and the soldiers out. Never let the media determine our war tactics. That had a lot to do with how Johnson decided what was the bomb and so forth. Don't trust the politicians. Think for yourself. We'll become brothers for life. Now, the next one here, military dogs are not just another piece of equipment. As we were leaving Vietnam, the United States military decided that the dogs were just another piece of equipment, like an old sock or something for us. So what they did was they either had the dog trainers hold the dog while they were euthanized, which I cannot believe doing anything to a man to make him sit there and hold his dog while you killed him, or they turn him over to the Vietnamese. Now, if you look at that picture right there, you can see what happened to our guard dogs and the dogs who gave their life, those over there. This is what happened to them. They became food for the Vietnamese. We definitely learned that one. If you're going to fight a war, fight the war to win. This is a lesson that has apparently been lost on this generation of leaders. What war movie best depicts the way things were, what really were in Vietnam? The Deer Hunter or Apocalypse Now? Now, Deer Hunter to me was one of the most, I don't know, I just couldn't sit through it. Apocalypse Now wasn't even written about Vietnam. It was written about a South American tribe. So I'm not certain either one of them to a certain extent covers the how the Vietnam War. There's been a couple of good movies recently that kind of showed really the way things were. It all depends on where you were, what year you were there, and who you were with. They learn to rotate whole units rather than individuals. This helps with unit cohesion, which seems to be going back to that in quite a bit. New brothers, togetherness, sense of purpose in death, and learning to kill without remorse. Okay, if you have a question or whatever, call me and say hi, 919-518-9773, or Skype, Computers TK Voice, and we'll keep moving on. Okay, this is what Senator John McCain had to say about what we learned. Senator John McCain wrote in the foreword of David Habersham's book, The Best and the Brightest. This is what Jonathan had to say. It was a shameful thing to ask men to suffer and die, to persevere through God-awful afflictions and heartache, to endure the dehumanizing experiences that are unavoidable in combat, for a cause that the country wouldn't support over time and that our leaders so wrongly believed could be achieved at a smaller cost than our enemy was prepared to make us pay. No other nation endeavor requires as much unshakable resolve as war. If the nation and the government lack that resolve, it is criminal to expect men in the field to carry it alone. Okay. Henry Kissinger wrote, one of the most important casualties of war was the tradition of American exceptionalism. The once near universal faith in our values and their relevance around the world gave way to intense divisions over the very validity of those values and the lengths we should go to promote and defend them, which some of that sounds like some of the things we're fighting today. And those schisms, excuse me, had a profound impact on the conduct of U.S. foreign policy ever since. Kissinger went on to argue that trauma inflicted by the Vietnam War in many ways has prevented the United States from implementing a coherent foreign policy. We sure weren't coherent when you were there. The clear-sighted, unquestioned policy of the age of exceptionalism has been replaced by one that is confused and applied differently, often hypocritically, depending on the circumstances. Troubled by his years in Vietnam, Colin Powell, as a high-level general, created a doctrine that the United States would only engage in a war that could win with decisive forces, and American interests were clearly at stake. America's next war in the Persian Gulf in the early 1990s fit that criteria. What about today? On how he has applied what he learned in Vietnam to life since the war, Chuck Hagel, Vietnam veteran, said, "There's not a day goes by that you don't pull back on at least some little thing. Life's not about being big things every day, and you don't recall in some way an experience you had in the services. In Vietnam, a tolerance and understanding reached beyond trying to understand more than the obvious underneath." And he goes on to say, and probably most fundamental for me as a United States Senator, when we talk about going to war against Iraq or against anyone, we need to think it through carefully, not just for the political and the geopolitical and the diplomatic and the economic consequences, and those are important. But at least for me, this old infantry sergeant thinks about when I was in Vietnam in 1968, United States Senator make decisions that affect my life and a lot of other people who lost their lives that they didn't have. I didn't have anything to say about it. In other words, the senators were making decisions they didn't have the right to have. Someone needs to represent that perspective in our government as well. The people in Washington make the policy, but it's a little guy who come back in body bags, Chuck Hagel. Okay. Robert G. Kaiser wrote in the Washington Post, what's the lessons we learned? Modesty. Before initiating a war of choice, and Vietnam and Iraq both qualify, define the goals with honesty and precision, then analyze what means will be needed to achieve it. Be certain you really understand the society you propose to transform, and never gamble that the political solution to such an adventure will somehow materialize after the military operation has begun. Without a plausible political plan and strong local support at the outset, military operations alone are unlikely to produce success. Those are some things that everybody who gets sworn in to government right now needs to read those and memorize them. Vietnam has become a textbook example of how not to fight a war, showed the limitations of fighting and limited war. The heavy cost of politicians meddling in military affairs and the results of micromanagement from the White House and not doing everything possible to achieve a decisive victory. It also showed the political consequences of the human cost of waging such a war. The Vietnam War is sometimes called McNamara's War. In his 1995 book, In Retrospect, Robert S. McNamara wrote, one of the Kennedy and Johnson administrations who had participated in the decisions on Vietnam and acted according to what we thought were the principles and traditions of this nation. I disagree with that. He did everything by computers and couldn't make a decision without it putting it in. He used a profit and loss type situation. We made all decisions in light of those values. Karen will say, yet we were wrong and terribly wrong. I truly believe that we made an error not of values and intentions, but of judgment and capabilities. Definitely judgment. McNamara also said that he and members of the Kennedy administration totally underestimated the nationalist aspect of Ho Chi Minh's movement. We saw him first as a communist and second as a Vietnamese nationalist. That was from Robert McNamara's In Retrospect. Lawrence Taylor, an infantry platoon leader in 1968 and 69, told Hackworth, that was Colonel Hackworth, I was in Vietnam after McNamara realized the war was unwinnable. My men and I went out into the boonies to fight Viet Cong, to get wounded or killed. To what end? Once the leadership knew the war could not be won by military means, didn't they owe it to the country to immediately make adjustments so more lives wouldn't be wasted? Good question there. Evan Thomas and John Barry wrote in Newsweek in his 1999 book, A Better War, Lower Sola, a retired Army lieutenant colonel, argues that contrary to the conventional wisdom, the United States military could have won in Vietnam if only the U.S. Congress hadn't cut off the military aid to South Vietnam. With their natural tendency to wage the last war, armies learned slowly. In World War II, American armed forces fought badly in Africa in 1942 and 43, and not so well in Italy in 1943 and 44, before getting it right in France and Germany in 1944 and 45. In Vietnam in 1965 and 67, the Americans pursued a misbegotten strategy of search and destroy, trying to fight an unconventional war with conventional forces that focused on body counts, while the North Vietnamese more shrewdly infiltrated into towns and villages. Not until General Creighton Adams replaced General Westmoreland as U.S. commander in 1968 did the Americans smarten up and began to fight a true counterinsurgency, focusing on protecting the population by a strategy of clear and whole. That, folks, is the lessons of Vietnam. Some of them have been adhered to. Unfortunately, most of it's been adhered to by those who fought it. The politicians don't seem to have learned anything. If they did, they're not using it. They're doing more things for their own good, I guess. But that is the lessons we learn as warriors. I hope that the young men and women who are going today and volunteering to go over and fight for our country do not have to go through the same learning process we have. Our next show will be October 14th. Can you believe September is getting over with? October 14th is the next LOV show, Lessons of Vietnam. So we'll look forward to seeing you then. If you were in the Triangle area, October the 2nd at the state capitol, there will be the monthly POWMIA ceremony held. So we invite you to come down for that. We are still under COVID, so you will be required to have a mask and keep your distance and so forth. Thank you again for tuning in. If you have any questions, you have my email address, dixonbill80@yahoo.com. Thank you, Amnon, for doing the producing and putting the show on tonight. And y'all have a great evening and stay safe.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.